Welcome back, video creeps. So today we're doing something really fucking cool, and we're having a new friend on the show. Why, you may ask? Because friends are dope and necessary. So I thought I would have my buddy on the show, so that way we can talk about Rosemary's Baby. So settle in, because it's gonna be a fucking dope time. And if you're pregnant, let's just see how you feel after the video. So today our guest is someone who I respect very much in the YouTube horror community. Her videos are extremely informative and interesting, and I look at her as kind of the like Elvira of YouTube, if you will. So without further ado, please welcome the delightfully frightening Ciara Hall.
Thank you so much for having me on your channel. This is exciting.
Dude, thank you so much for taking the time just to asshole around. And I'm definitely pumped up to talk about Rosemary's Baby with you. But before we get into that, tell me a bit about yourself and like just your experience with this movie.
So I run the YouTube channel Ciara where I regularly post horror movie reviews and the occasional spooky gameplay. As far as my experience with Rosemary's Baby goes, I feel like it's one of those movies that I've always been aware of, at least on some level, but I didn't really give it a watch until I read the book that it was based on by Ira Levin. I really liked Levin's writing style and the way that he was able to turn the most mundane, everyday things into something truly frightening. This made me want to seek out Polanski's film, and I was thoroughly impressed by how faithful an adaptation it was. It helps that producer William Castle bought the rights to the film even before the book was published by Random House, and the majority of the movie's dialogue is even taken from the book. Like, there's even a story of Polanski combing through the New Yorker to find a specific advertisement that was mentioned in the book, and when he couldn't find it, he called Ira Levin up for help. Only to discover that Levin made the advertisement up. That's how dedicated Polanski was to staying faithful to the source material. So yeah, this turned out to be one of those instances where fans of the book would find very little to complain about the movie.
Hollywood seems to have like an obsession with like demonic pregnancies. Especially when you put into context movies like Devil's Due, The Omen, or like fucking Demon Seed. What do you think makes Rosemary's Baby stand apart from all those other films?
I think that pregnancy in general is very easy to interpret as a horrifying experience. I mean, at its base level, we're talking about something that happens within your own body and yet you have very little control over. It changes your entire life and your identity as a woman, and there's all this anxiety about doing it right, which becomes a big theme in Rosemary's Baby. I mean, Rosemary admits to having some sisters who have gone through the whole pregnancy thing before, but she lives very far away from any family. And her doctor discourages her from checking out pregnancy books, meaning that the only people she can turn to for advice are friends, and she seems to have very few of those. So when she starts experiencing horrible pains, she doesn't know if that's normal or not. She depends entirely on the Castevets and Dr. Saperstein, so if they keep confidently assuring her that everything's normal and that she's doing it all the right way, how can she know any different? Especially in 1968, when this movie was released, it's not like we talked all that much about women's health, and nobody really prepares you for this stuff, so you just kind of have to trust that everyone around you knows what they're talking about and hope for the best. More than anything, Rosemary's Baby is about a vulnerable, secluded woman who puts her trust in the wrong people. First, she puts her trust in Guy, expecting him to have her best interests at heart. And then she puts her trust in the Castevets, expecting them to know what they're talking about when it comes to a healthy, normal pregnancy. And she pays the price for both of those assumptions. I think that even audiences that don't relate to Rosemary's need for motherhood can at least respond to her helplessness and her drive to do the right thing. Maybe they've put their trust in the wrong person before. Maybe they know what it's like to want something so badly, only to have it torn away by someone else's selfishness. Or maybe they simply sympathize with Rosemary, who only wants one thing that should be so simple, and yet she still can't achieve it.
I think there's something so fucked up about not like fully knowing what's going on around you. And I think the cult aspect of this movie really stuck with me a long time after watching this movie. Like, I remember watching this movie as like a little kid, sitting on a blanket in a park, watching it on a huge screen, and just being like, I shouldn't be watching this. What do you think are some clear signs that the people around you might be out to get you?
This movie definitely warns that just because it seems like someone has your best interests at heart, that doesn't necessarily mean that they do. Rosemary's biggest fault is that she doesn't try to reach out and get other perspectives enough. The Coven goes out of their way to cut Rosemary from the few ties that she does have. They take her away from her trusted doctor. They curse the one friend that she does see on a regular basis. All so that she has no one to turn to but them. They become her only source for information. But in the few times that we do see Rosemary reach out, those outside sources either contradict what the Coven is saying, like when she can't resist reading one pregnancy book, or they're shocked to hear the types of things that the Coven has been telling her, like when she tells the girls at the party about the pain that she's been experiencing, or when she talks to Hutch about the pregnancy. In fact, it's only by reaching out to someone outside the Coven that Rosemary is able to see them for what they are. Hutch is the one that recognizes that something is wrong, and he's the one that does the research to expose them. It might be easy to interpret Rosemary's Baby as a warning against trusting anyone, ever. After all, if Rosemary can't trust her sweet, elderly neighbors, then who can she trust? But that doesn't seem to be the case here. Rather, the movie seems to be warning against people who want to be your entire social circle, who take you away from what's familiar and refuse to let you return. In that way, the Coven very much does resemble cult activity, especially considering they choose Rosemary as their victim, a woman who, again, has very few ties and is very vulnerable.
See, I think watching this movie in 2020 is such a different experience than watching it in 1968. The world has changed. You can't treat people the way that Rosemary is treated in this movie. Especially when you think about women's rights and how far we've come and just the idea of equality and like gender roles. And as time is going to go on, like people are only going to become more accepting and more aware of that. So how would you describe the way that Rosemary is treated in this movie to someone in like the year 3020 or some shit?
Yeah, Rosemary is infantilized for sure. This might be part of the reason why the Coven has such an easy time keeping Rosemary where they need her. She's very used to needing permission to do things and letting Guy control her life. She always just seems to assume that other people know what's best for her, and she trusts them the way that a child would. There's even a scene where she has to sneak her dessert into her napkin because she doesn't want to eat it. The movie also goes out of its way to prove just how self-sacrificing Rosemary is, showing us bigger examples like her making sacrifices for Guy's career, but smaller examples as well, like her requesting that the music not be turned off if it's only for her sake. Rosemary is, in many ways, the stereotypical perfect wife. She's happy being passive and subservient, and only really takes an active role when it comes to protecting her child. I'd be curious to see how the story would change if Rosemary had just a little bit more agency. Would she question Dr. Saperstein when he discourages her from getting a second opinion? Could the Coven even get to her in the same way? There's also the whole scene near the end when Rosemary turns to Dr. Hill for help. Hill immediately returns Rosemary to the custody of her husband, even though she's expressed fear of him. Yeah, the things that she's accusing her husband of sound a little impossible, but regardless, she still turned to Dr. Hill seeking asylum, claiming that her husband wanted to harm her, and he still trusted the word of her husband before her. It's a very disturbing scene that reminds you just how trivial a woman's safety used to be.
You're fucking on the money, Jesus fucking Christ. Something I think that's really interesting about this movie is that there seems to be like a thick layer of subliminal messaging going on throughout the entire film. I know one thing in particular that sticks out for me is the ticking clock. Like, you hear it throughout the movie progressively, the one that's right by Rosemary's bed. Now, it's easy to say, like, yeah, this will be, it's countdown to fucking Devil Baby Town. But what is your personal interpretation of that?
Well, I totally agree that the ticking of the clock is kind of a countdown to Satan, baby. I also kind of saw it as a means of communicating Rosemary's mental state at the time. The most memorable scene, for me anyway, where the ticking features is just before she's impregnated by the devil, when she's starting to lose consciousness and Guy is undressing her. Meanwhile, there's absolutely no noise except for that incessant ticking. I wouldn't say that it's time slowing down per se. If anything, it feels like the clock is going a little fast. But it does seem to reflect a painful awareness of time, and because the ticking never seems to stop, there is a feeling of endlessness behind it all. There's this countdown to some hugely important event, but neither Rosemary nor the audience knows what it is yet. All that they know is that building anxiety. Something is going to happen, and it's going to change everything.
Now, something completely fucking undeniable about this film is the style itself. You yourself are definitely a person with a very unique and cool looking aesthetic. And me, a person who dresses like a complete fucking dickhead all the time, can't help but love the style of this movie. I know a lot of that has to do with just the time that it came out, but fuck, it's great. I can't get enough of it anytime that I get a good look at it in this movie.
Thank you. And as a girl that's rocked the short hair look before, I have to give credit to this movie for popularizing the pixie cut. It was a really controversial style at the time, too. Some people referred to it as a masculine look, and there were even rumors that Mia Farrow's husband, Frank Sinatra, hated it so much that he served her divorce papers. Farrow has since come out to disprove these rumors. Well, it is true that Sinatra served her divorce papers partway through filming. That had more to do with him taking issue with her acting than anything. By all reports, he actually seemed to like her wearing short hair. Another rumor is that the pixie cut Farrow wears was given to her by Vidal Sassoon. The movie does include a line that credits him for the style, but that was just because the book name-dropped him. According to Farrow, the pixie cut was actually something she gave herself long before filming Rosemary's Baby, and the shots of her with longer hair in the movie are just her wearing a wig.
Now, just to be completely silly and put this movie in a league of some other fucking really great films, if you had to take Rosemary's Baby and put it in like a triple feature night at a drive-in, what are the other two movies that you personally would pair them with?
I would have to put Rosemary's Baby with 1976's The Omen and 1973's The Exorcist. All three movies came out within 10 years of each other, and all deal with children somehow associated with the devil.
That's one of those fucking questions that I didn't even think about the answer myself. But shit, you rocked it. That was fucking great. That makes total fucking sense. For you, what's something about this movie that just doesn't work at all?
I'm a little torn with this question because the part that I think is probably the hardest sell is also completely necessary to the movie, and that's its slow build. A good majority of the movie is just mundane life stuff with the occasional unfamiliar bit slipped in to indicate that something's wrong, like Rosemary craving raw chicken during her pregnancy. If you don't know the ending to the movie, or if you just have the patience to sit through all the mundane stuff, then this slow build is incredible because it gradually defamiliarizes everything and leaves room for doubt about whether or not the things Rosemary is experiencing is real. Plus, it's this movie's ability to present things that seem very normal and then turn it on its head that I really appreciate. But I know that a lot of modern audiences won't have the patience to sit through it, and already knowing how the movie's gonna end won't help matters. In that sense, this movie may have been more effective back before it became a cultural icon, but I still wouldn't change a thing because losing that slow build would make the movie less effective overall.
A lot of movies have a tendency to just beat you over the head with a message while trying not to do it in your face. Based on the context of Rosemary's Baby, what do you think is the hidden message going on in this film?
I see this movie almost as a morality tale about being too trusting or too passive. If Rosemary had done her own research, or perhaps reached out to someone who actually knew what they were doing, then maybe this fate could have been avoided. This movie teaches you not to take it for granted that everyone has your best interests at heart. You need to treat everyone, even your kindly elderly neighbors, with at least a little bit of suspicion.
See guys, this is why I wanted her on my channel. Fucking smart. Now finally, what is one thing about this movie that you think makes it such a classic? And what's the type of person that you would recommend this movie to?
One thing that this movie does very successfully is that it defamiliarizes the familiar. Everything that this movie introduces is very mundane and recognizable. For instance, in some ways, we've all known someone like Minnie and Roman. Someone who thought they knew what was best for you and tried to push that on you a little bit too hard. Or perhaps someone who, on the surface, seems very sweet, but they just won't take no for an answer and keep coming around to the point that you don't want to hurt their feelings, but you also don't want anything to do with them. This movie does a very good job of building on those relatable situations and emotions, and then twisting them just enough that they turn into something horrendous. I think that there's something in that, in knowing this from real life, but then seeing it in a different light when you investigate just a little further, that really unnerves people and turns this movie into a classic. And as far as who I'd recommend it to, I think anyone who calls themselves a movie fan needs to check this one out. As much as this is definitely a horror movie, it's more unnerving than it is outright horrifying. There's not really any gore or jump scares. The most horrifying aspects are just the situations that Rosemary is put in. And because of that, I don't think you need to be a die-hard horror hound to enjoy this. Rather, as long as you have the patience to sit through a slow build, I think just about anyone can enjoy this movie. It's those that don't have the patience that I think are going to have the hardest time with this.
And lastly, I just want to thank you one more time for taking the time out of your channel to come over on my channel just to dick around and talk about this fucking awesome film. What do you have coming up on your channel, or any future projects that you have going on that you would want to talk about?
Thank you. I'm so glad we got to do this. You can find me at my YouTube channel, Ciara, where I post regular horror movie reviews. I like to do a mix of new movies and cult classics. So for instance, as of filming this, I'm planning on doing a series of reviews for Rob Zombie movies, but also the new Fantasy Island movie, so keep an eye out for that. You can also follow me on Instagram. That's probably the best way to contact me if you had any questions or comments. Plus, it's just a good way to stay updated on what I'm doing. The handle for that is Ciara_Celine.
Guys, again, a very big special thank you to Ciara Hall for coming on to Video Creep and talking Rosemary's Baby. All the links to her information is going to be down in the description of this video, so please take the time to head over there and show our girl some love. Now, as always, if you're not already subscribed, please subscribe below and hit the notification bell so that way you know when my next video is up. That's going to be it for this installment of Video Creep. Peace.